Hello, everyone. Welcome to my free webinar, Reclaim Your Desire and Reignite Your Love Life. I am Xanet Pailet. I'm a sex and intimacy educator and coach. My company is The Power of Pleasure, and I am really excited to welcome you to this webinar because this issue about women feeling like they've lost their desire is probably the most common question and the most common reason that women contact me to help them get their sex life back on track. And so I thought it would be a really good idea to create a webinar, a class around reclaiming your desire. And because I think it's really important that this webinar is really educational, really not promotional, at the end I will give you some ways in which you can get in contact with me if you want to work with me individually as a couple or in my group coaching program. But really this webinar is educational for you to understand more about what's going on for you, because I think it's so important that we have this information so that we can make the positive changes that we want to our life. So this is what we're going to cover in this 45-minute webinar. I'm going to tell you a little bit about me and my story and how I even came to be a sex and intimacy educator and coach. And then I'm going to cover 5 reasons, and there's more than 5, but I'm just for the purposes of simplicity, I'm going to cover the 5 major reasons that women lose their desire for sex, and then give you some very specific ideas and tools and techniques that will help you reclaim your desire so that you can, in fact, reignite your love life. So I want to tell you a little bit about who I am and a little bit about my story. So I've not always been a sex and intimacy educator and coach. In fact, for most of my life, I was a healthcare lawyer living in New York City on the East Coast. Right now, I'm living in beautiful Northern California, as you can see from this picture of me sitting at the beach that's very close to my home. So the way in which I became a sex and intimacy educator and coach happened through my own journey around my sexual healing and my sexual awakening. You see, sex has always been a problem for me. It hurt. Sex was very painful from the very first time I had sex when I was 16 years old, all the way into my marriage. And rather than doing anything about it because I didn't know what to do about it, I ended up just living in a sexless marriage for over 26 years. It didn't start out sexless. My ex-husband and I did have sex. In fact, we have 2 children. But sex was always uncomfortable. It was a drag. It felt very painful. I didn't have pleasure. I didn't have orgasms. And so after my second child was born, when I was in my early 30s, I just made a decision to basically close up shop. It didn't happen all at once. It happens gradually, which is usually what happens when couples start veering into a sexless marriage. But before I knew it, my husband and I had been sleeping in separate beds for more than 15 years. And what happened, which is what frequently happens, is that not only did we stop having sex, we stopped having any type of physical connection, we stopped having intimacy, and eventually we just really stopped having any type of relationship other than the fact that we were really good parents. And then I found myself single, 50, living in New York City, really wanting to be in a relationship, really wanting to meet another man, concerned because I knew that I hated having sex and I didn't know who was going to be willing to take that on at this stage in our lives. Well, the answer came from a very unusual place. I met a man on OkCupid in New York who had some experience with Tantra. I didn't really know what Tantra was, but he was very open, and I was actually able to talk to him and tell him that sex was a problem for me. And he said to me, Xanet, I think that we should experience some Tantra together because I think you might have a different experience with sex. And I was like open to it because I felt pretty broken, which is what happens when you feel like you can't have intercourse or it's very painful. I just felt like a broken woman. And it sounded somewhat interesting. And he offered me a night of goddess worship. I'd never been worshiped like a goddess before. I didn't even know what goddess worship was, but I was intrigued enough to say, okay, I'm in. I have to tell you that that night of goddess worship was perhaps the most powerful night in my life. Not in terms of the sexual experience that I had or the amount of pleasure and orgasms that I had, but it was transformational because I began to see that I could have a different relationship with sex than I had ever experienced before. What made this night so unusual for me is that the experience was completely different. For starters, I was actually treated like a goddess. There were roses on my bed. He drew a bath for me. There was beautiful music playing and candles. So I felt very cared for, and that the atmosphere was very interesting and alluring and felt a little bit romantic. My friend at the time told me that he wasn't going to take his pants off, so I knew that I didn't have to give back. He was really good at checking in with me, like checking in and seeing what I liked, what I didn't like, asking me if I wanted to stop, never pushing any boundaries. He was very attuned to my body and my breath, and he really helped me learn how to take deep breaths into my body. And that really changed things for me, because as I breathed deeply into my body, I started to experience sensation that I had never experienced before. I actually had some pleasure that night. I didn't have an orgasm, but I had pleasure and I had sensation. And I left that evening with hope. Hope that, things could change for me. Hope that sex could be enjoyable again. Hope that maybe I can find an orgasm. And hope that I wasn't going to be a broken woman, that there was a future for me in my sexuality. That night was the precipitating factor that made me change my life and leave New York, the East Coast, all of my friends and my business, and moved to California, where I could really take a deep dive into women's sexuality, where I was able to study with some of the most renowned teachers and coaches in the world, and was able in a relatively short period of time to basically get my own PhD, if you will, in sex. So I became a sexological body worker and a holistic pelvic care practitioner, a somatica sex and intimacy coach, and a Tantra educator. I actually teach Tantra courses at the Ecstatic Living Institute. Another really crazy thing happened to me as well. When I started my business, I also had this idea that I wanted to write a book. And the summer of 2018, my book was published, Living an Orgasmic Life, Heal Yourself and Awakening Your Pleasure. It's a book that talks about my own personal experience and my own personal journey around sexuality and my sexual healing and awakening. It's very personal and very vulnerable. I also include a lot of stories from my clients' experiences. And then, of course, there's a lot of practical tools and tips to help you not only understand your issues that you might be having with sexuality and loss of desire, but also how you get it back, how you awaken your pleasure. And much to my surprise and delight, it actually became a bestseller. And it's been incredibly rewarding that I get these emails. I wake up with these emails from women just saying, oh my God, I read your book, Xanet, and I completely get it. I so much relate to what you said, and you've helped me so much just by reading it. That's been a very important part of my journey. And if you haven't read the book, I would love for you to consider buying it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. It's kind of everywhere. One of the things that I really focus in on the book is helping women understand what are the blocks to us being able to experience in our pleasure, and then what are the things that we can do. And so I'm going to pull a little bit of the content from the book so you can get a little bit of a taste in this webinar about the content of the book and my process and belief in terms of being able to find your desire. Because as I said before, this is the most common issue that clients call me about or email me about or write me about. And it's what I spend a lot of time working on. So I want you to get the benefit of all of that information. Okay, so we're going to start by looking at the number one reason why women lose their sexual desire. So the number one reason that women lose our desire for sex is because we are not feeling emotionally safe with our partners. Now, this is a little bit of a broad generalization, but most women really need to feel emotionally connected with our partners. Think about it. When we are sexual, we are at our most vulnerable. Our legs are wide open. Our heart is wide open. And if we're not feeling emotionally safe, if we're feeling like our partner doesn't get us, doesn't see us, doesn't hear us, if there's anger, if there's resentment, if there's bad feelings between you and your partner, especially if you're in a long-term relationship, but in really any type of relationship, then for most women, it's like having sex with your partner is the last thing that you want to do. And it is a huge tamp on our desire. So let's now talk about ways in which we can start feeling emotionally safe if this is something that you relate to. So ways in which we create emotional safety. Emotional safety comes from true intimacy, from feeling like you can be really vulnerable with your partner, that you can really say anything, you can talk about your feelings, and you know that you will be listened to. Not that they're going to try to take care of you or try to fix you. A lot of partners feel like they need to do this, but they can really just hear you, listen to your feelings, and have some empathy. I love this graphic, intimacy, see into me. This is what creates emotional safety. And when I work with couples who are struggling in sexless relationships, so in my couples work, I pretty much exclusively work with couples who are really struggling with sexuality. This is the very first thing we always work on, which is creating the emotional safety, creating the vulnerability, having those challenging conversations when you really have to talk about your feelings, and then hearing your partner's feelings and feeling the pain of hearing that. And even though that sounds really challenging, vulnerability creates a deeper level of intimacy than keeping everything at a surface level. I see this over and over again. When we can create the emotional safety, when two people can really talk about what's going on for them, talk about their feelings, know that their feelings are being heard and respected, even though they might not be agreed with, it creates a much deeper sense of connection. And this is one of the things that women really need in order to be able to feel that they want to have sex with their partner and feel that desire is to feel like you got me and I can be safe in this space. So here are some other things that you can do in order to be able to create emotional connection and vulnerability so that you can have more emotional safety. There are some really good resources here that I'm going to suggest, some books to read. Hold Me Tight by Sue Johnson is one of my favorite books. I love the work by Terry Neal. He has actually an Audible book or an audio book called Fierce Intimacy, and he's very practical but gives you a lot of very good practical tools and skills. Making Love Real by my teacher Celeste Hirschman and Danielle Harrell is another really great resource for couples to learn how do we understand our triggers in the context of a relationship, how do we work through our triggers, how do we hold each other in this very vulnerable space? And then anything by Esther Perel, Mating in Captivity. And she has a new book around State of Affairs, which is also a really excellent book. All of these books and all of the work that I do with couples is really focused on the creating a secure attachment, and attachment, which I'm not going to go into, but I do go very deeply both in my coaching program, my individual and group coaching program, is really the key factor that helps us create emotional safety. If we can create a secure attachment with our partner, and many of us have come from wounded places as children where we did not have that secure attachment, and we end up identifying and connecting with partners who trigger us around attachment. And so very often we need to relearn, or maybe for the first time learn and experience what secure attachment looks like. And say that this is very hard work to do by yourself. If you feel like you're in a situation where there are challenges in the relationship, very often problems with sex are really just indicative. They're a symptom of problems within the relationship itself, and very often it's around emotional connection, emotional intimacy, not feeling emotionally safe. So if this resonates with you, I want to really strongly suggest that you go and get some support. Work with a sex therapist or a really good marriage and family therapist who does attachment work, or you work with a sex and intimacy coach who has been very specifically trained on working on attachment in the context of a sexual relationship. So let's assume that you are in a relationship where there's good communication and there's emotional safety, but you're still feeling like you're just not feeling the desire to have sex. So the rest of these reasons will also be very relatable for you. The second one, but perhaps one of the most important ones when we look at why women lose our desire for sex, is because women are pre-programmed to say no to sex. We are not pre-programmed to say yes to sex. No one tells you as a child that sex is about your pleasure, that sex is something to look forward to, that you can ask for what you want during sex. That is very, very uncommon. I mean, I've heard about it once or twice, but it's very, very uncommon. The messages that most women get about sex are very negative. We get messages that sex is something that is only for marriage. That is still a message that is still very common, that it's about abstinence. We get messages that sex is about making sure that we don't get pregnant, that we don't get an STI, that the only thing that men want is to be able to get into our pants. By the way, these are very different messages than most men get about sex, right? Men are told, like, go have a good time, sow your wild oats, but make sure that you don't get her pregnant. A lot of women also, especially women who are sexually curious and actually wanted to explore sex, maybe had sex with a lot of partners when they were in high school, they also get slut shamed. And unfortunately, this is most commonly done not so much by men, but actually by women. So all of these messages that we get around sex, this no, 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 makes us just want to be shut down around it. We're not feeling good about it. Like I said before, no one tells you that sex is for your pleasure. Rather, maybe sex is obligation. You need to take, especially if you're married in a long-term relationship, it's your obligation to take care of your partner. Make sure that your partner gets what your partner wants, as opposed to make sure that you get what you want. So let's talk about how do we redo some of this programming, because we're all programmed this way. Well, the very first thing that I have all of my clients do, both individually and in my group coaching program, is to really learn your sexual blueprint. So your sexual blueprint consists of all of the messages and experiences that you had around sex as a child. So messages that you received, like I just went through before, were you pre-programmed to say no to sex? But also, what were the messages that maybe you didn't hear, but you saw growing up? For example, Did your parents hold hands? Were they physical with each other? Did you see their intimacy? Did they cuddle? What type of messages did you receive from your religion? What type of messages did you receive from your peers? What type of experiences did you have? Did you ever have experiences of being shamed because you were young and you wanted to explore your sexuality? Maybe you were very young. Maybe you were like 4 or 5 years old. I mean, I was in first grade and I got caught playing doctor with my best friend in first grade, and she ended up moving away at the end of the year. And I was 100% sure it was my fault because we got caught playing doctor. These type of seemingly innocuous experiences that we had as children have a huge impact on our adult relationship with sexuality. And that is what your sexual blueprint is. It's how these experiences and messages as children and as adolescents, and even your very first sexual experiences, have an impact on how you view sex as an adult. And of course, for any of you who have experienced sexual trauma and abuse, which is sadly so common, and I see this all the time in my clients, that impact, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse, verbal abuse, any type of abuse, really impacts the way in which you relate to your sexuality and the safety or lack of safety that you have around sex and around members of either the opposite sex or the same sex, depending upon who was an abuser. So here's something that you can do in order to be able to, as this slide says, break free from shame. Because what happens, what you'll notice when you do your sexual blueprint is there's this shame thing that shows up. And shame is one of the biggest blocks for us to be able to fully open ourselves up to our pleasure and to our sexuality. If you're feeling shame, if you're feeling uncomfortable, if you feel like you need to hide yourself, hide your body, hide your sexuality, you can't be vulnerable, you can't be open, and you can't be expressive. We all experience shame. In my book, I call shame the nastiest 5-letter word in the universe. And it really is, because we all experience so much shame that there's shame even talking about shame. One of the people that's really helped us break out of this has been all of the work that's done by Brene Brown. If you haven't seen any of her, if you haven't read her books, I strongly suggest that you go watch her TED Talk on vulnerability and shame, and you will see how potent shame is and how incredibly powerful it is when we start actually dealing with it. Because the thing is, we all experience shame. It is an absolute human experience. There's not a person on this universe who hasn't experienced shame. So one of the best things that you can do in order to break free from your shame is to actually talk about it. And I often do this with my couples. I actually have them do this together, but I'm suggesting today that you do it with your best female friend. You could do it with your partner too, but it's really great to do it with your best female friend. Have a Shame-a-Thon. And a Shame-a-Thon means that you actually look at your sexual blueprint, and you'll see, if you sign up for my email after this webinar, that one of the things that you're going to receive is your a sexual blueprint guide, which is going to provide you with all of these questions that you'll be able to look at. And then you actually talk to your friend about some of the shame experiences that you had. Because one of the best ways to be able to break free from shame is to talk about it. Talking about shame normalizes shame. For me, one of the most shameful experiences I had that I write about extensively in my book was an experience with my dog, Lucky, when I was 7 or 8 years old. He liked to lick my genitals, and that felt really good for me. But I also knew, having already been shamed by my mother for playing doctor with my friend, that this was a really bad thing. And it created a lot of shame for me. It created a lot of anxiety for me around oral sex. I didn't realize this till way, way later in life when I started going through my own healing journey. but this is how the shame actually impacted me. And when I was able to finally share it and talk about it at a seminar and explain my story, first of all, it was super hard to do, but once I did it, I felt so much freer. And then also, like, 2 other people came up to me and said, I've had similar experiences, like with a dog or with a cat. I used to rub myself against my cat, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm not crazy. I'm not abnormal. Have a shame-a-thon with your BFF. Another thing that you will probably notice when you do your sexual blueprint, this is a huge issue for women around shame, is that we have a tremendous amount of body shame, especially after we've gone through a transition, having had a baby, going through menopause, gaining, 10 pounds in college, or what do they call it, the freshman 20, right? All of this stuff. And, ladies, all of you, no matter what size your body is, no matter whether you have all of your body parts or maybe you only have some of your body parts, like, you all are gorgeous and beautiful. I love this photo because it's just so beautiful. The diversity of sizes of bodies, of shapes of bodies, of colors of bodies. And what you will work on if you end up working with me individually, or especially in my group coaching program, is really doing some very powerful exercises that helps you reframe your relationship with your body. And you will learn how your body actually is your biggest ally. So many of us like shame ourselves and blame our body. I blamed my body for all of the ways in which it let me down, and it caused me pain, and it gave me UTIs. And when I was able to reframe that and realize, like, oh, actually my body was just trying to protect me from pain, I was able to start to have a new relationship with our body. And that's a very important piece of getting rid of our shame and feeling our sexual desire, is getting back into our body and really appreciating it. The number 3 reason that women lose their desire for sex is that we're in our heads and we're not in our bodies. So this shows up in a lot of different ways. It shows up when we are being sexual with a partner and we're thinking and we're worrying and like, oh, I think I'm getting aroused. I'm starting to feel like I might have an orgasm, but oh my God, the more I think about it, the less likely that's going to happen. As a society, we spend a lot of time in our heads right now. Technology has placed us in our heads. But think about it. Sensation and pleasure and sex, it happens in our bodies. And yes, our brain is a big piece of this. And for many women, our brain needs to be stimulated as well as our bodies. And that might vary. Maybe it's visual stimulation. A lot of women are very oral. So many women, like, I know this is true for me. Like, I want a sexual partner to tell me, man, you're hot, Xanet, or God, I just love the way you smell. I mean, that's one of the ways, that's part of my love language as well. But it helps stimulate my brain, and I can also feel that in my body. One of the best things that you can do is really work on getting in our bodies. And there's a number of ways to do this. For example, there are dance classes that you can take that allow you to be in your body. I'm a huge fan of Zumba classes because we're really moving our pelvis, and it's, kind of sexy and sensual. Salsa is also like that. Yoga can really help you get in your body. I offer a free 14-day body awakening program. It's called myawakebody.com that I would definitely encourage. You're all going to be invited to join this so that you can also use these very simple exercises to start to get in touch with your body, because pleasure happens in our body. And so the more you can get in your body, the more desire you're going to feel. When you have a good experience, when you have a lot of pleasure and a lot of sensation, regardless of whether you have an orgasm or not, because I really try to take the pressure of orgasm and expectation off the table. But when you have great sensation in your body, you want it more. You remember oh man, the last time we got together and we were sexual with each other, it felt amazing. there's oxytocin and dopamine, all of these hormones that start flowing in your body, and it actually makes you want to have more of that. So getting out of your head and into your body is going to be one of the best ways to help you get your desire back. And related to that, what I like to offer you is to think about all of the ways you can awaken all of your 5 senses. Very often, like again, we're right up here. And so if you can awaken your senses, take a warm bath, right? The sensation of touch on your body to really bring pleasure into your life. And I'm not even talking about sexual pleasure. When I talk to women about pleasure, I always ask them, so what's your relationship with pleasure? How much pleasure do you bring into your life? How aware are you of pleasure? The more aware you become of pleasure through all of the 5 senses in the body, the more connected you will be with your body and the more connected you will be with the desire. Smelling flowers, taking warm baths, eating a luscious, delicious chocolate dipped strawberry, my personal favorite. All of this will help you get more in your body and more connected to your sensation and your pleasure. The more connected you are to sensation, the more connected you are to pleasure, the easier it's going to be for that desire to be accessible by you and to be felt. And there's one other thing. Sometimes we really need to feel desired by somebody else. And very often our partners do a really bad job of desiring us, especially if you're in a long-term relationship and you take each other for granted and, you're living life together, right? And so one of the things that I like to recommend is to do things to make yourself feel sexy. Dress sexy for yourself, right? Put on a sexy bra and sexy underwear, even if it's over yoga pants. Although I think, you should also think about wearing a sexy top. Like starting to do things for yourself to make yourself feel sexy will really help stir up your desire. And another thing that you can do, and I'm a huge fan of this, is get together with your girlfriends. And this is true whether you're married in a relationship or whether you're single. And go out, get dressed up, feel sexy, and flirt with people. Flirt with men, flirt with women, but just go to a place where you can exercise that flirting muscle. Other people thinking that we're cute or that we're sexy, that brings up our desire. And I'm not suggesting, especially if you're in a long-term monogamous relationship, that you act on that, but feeling like somebody or some other people are desiring you allows you to bring it back into the relationship. Sometimes we kind of have to do like a reboot of our system, and I believe we have to go outside of the relationship. One of Esther Perel's favorite couples practices is she says that you should never go on a date arriving together, that you should actually arrive separately, and you should maybe go to the bar, and you should maybe sidle up to this very attractive person who happens to be your partner, but maybe you don't feel that way for that moment. Imagine what it would feel like if I was just a single woman and I saw that hot woman or hot man at the bar and I went up to them. All of these things help us to reignite our pleasure, to remember what it used to be like and to take actions and do things to bring that excitement back into the relationship. Okay, so here's a question for you. True or false? In women's sexual arousal follows desire. The answer to this is false. Arousal following desire means that you feel desire first and then you get aroused. But for most women, that is not how we work. That's not how our bodies work, because unlike men, we are much more sexually disconnected from our pleasure parts. Think about it this way. Men wear their arousal equipment on the outside of their body. You touch a man's penis, and pretty much, this isn't 100% true, but for most men, they're going to feel aroused, and then they're going to feel desire, right? Touch a man's penis, he gets hard. But for most women, we actually need a lot of foreplay. We need to get ready for sex. And part of the reason that so many women lose their desire for sex is because they've never really had great sex, or that the type of sex that they have on a consistent basis is not a type of sex where they're actually at their highest level of arousal. A big issue that women have, Sherry Winston talks about it all the time, is premature penetration. That women are prematurely penetrated with a penis or with a finger before they are actually ready for it. And when that happens, it could feel uncomfortable, it could be painful, or it could just only feel okay because you're not at a high enough level of arousal. So I love this chart because it shows so distinctly the differences between male's arousal and female arousal. So in a man's arousal, they get excited very, very quickly. You can see they peak very, very quickly, and then they also come down very, very quickly. But women are very different. We get aroused slowly. I like to say that women's arousal is like a cake baking in the oven. We bake from the outside in. So our arousal happens slowly. Most women need a minimum of 30, but I actually like to say like 30 to 45 minutes of really good foreplay, including very deep, passionate kissing, oral sex, and finger stimulation on the clitoris, or even maybe some G-spot stimulation before they are really at their highest level of arousal, where they can experience orgasm. We have a tremendous amount of orgasmic capacity that most women never get to realize. In my group coaching program, we spend a lot of time talking about the different types of orgasms that women can have, and how so many of us never get to be there because we're not aroused enough. There's very, very high levels of arousal. Women have a capacity for sex that far exceeds the capacity that most men have, but we don't know how to access it, and that's just crying shame. But what you can also see in this chart is that even when we come to our peak, right, like at the very peak, we've had an orgasm, our desire, our arousal does not take a steep drop. Men have prolactin, which actually surges through their system, which brings the erection down and brings their whole system down. A lot of men will fall asleep after sex or feel very sleepy. For most women, again, broad generalizations, that does not happen. We actually can stay at this very high level of arousal. And if this chart was to continue, you would see that if you continue to stimulate a woman, if you continue to give her orgasms, if you continue to give her a G-spot massage, this graph would start to be going up because, we peak around here and then our arousal continues to climb and we go to even in higher and higher levels of orgasm to the point where we can even have like an out-of-body orgasmic experience. There's a lot more around orgasmic energy, and I spend a lot of time talking about this in my online program when I work with women, and often when we're doing couples work as well. But this is a very rich area, and it's an area that most women haven't explored, and it's an area where you can really find a tremendous amount of pleasure. And when you're having those orgasms and the dopamine is flowing, dopamine is like crack cocaine. It is highly addictive. When you get those huge surges of dopamine, man, I've had some amazing orgasms. All you want is more sex and more orgasms. That is another way in which we can reclaim our desire. And finally, a lot of women are bored in their sex lives and they don't know what they want. So boredom is becoming a bigger and bigger issue. Recently, there was a very good book that was released by Wednesday March, Dr. Wednesday March, called Untrue, in which she really looks at the data and research around women's desire. And she talks about a lot of very important things. But what I want to focus on in this slide is the fact that women get bored very easily that women actually need a lot of variety in sex. I think many of you might relate to this, and we actually get bored a lot easier than men do. There's actually data that shows this, that we need constant change, constant stimulation, and it could be something simple as instead of having sex in the bedroom, we're going to have sex in the living room, or we're going to have sex in the shower, or we're going to have sex outside or in our hot tub, right? Or we're going to try different positions, or maybe we're going to try to put chocolate syrup all over each other and lick each other's body. There's a really good book, The Guide to Getting It On, that has like a gazillion different things that you can do. But this is a really important element for women. We get bored very easily. And one of the ways to get your desire back is to do a lot of fun and different and interesting things. And related to this, and the other piece is, very often we don't know what we want and we don't know how to ask for it. We may not know what we want on our body. We just know what we're getting we don't like, and it's not feeling good. And it may be that we don't know our own arousal system. This is another thing that I really work with women on, especially in my group coaching program, is like really learning your body, understand what turns you on, like know your own roadmap so that you can help your partner understand your roadmap. Sometimes we know our roadmap and we're still not getting what we want, and we're afraid to ask for what we want because maybe we think we're going to get shot down, or maybe we're going to be disappointed because we're not going to get what we want. So what are some of the things that you can do in order to prevent boredom and get what you want? Well, I call them the 3 C's: communication, curiosity, and creativity. These 3 elements will help you get what you want and make sure that your sex life isn't boring. Communication, being able to talk to your partner, have real conversations about what's working, what's not working, what you like in the moment, what needs to be different, in a very supportive and non-judgmental and non-critical way. Curiosity. There's a lot of great data that shows that successful couples who maintain a long-term relationship and maintain a sexual long-term relationship are very curious people. They're explorers. They try new things. They go to new classes. They go vacation in new spots. They don't go to the same restaurant night, weekend after weekend after weekend. Same thing in your sex life, being curious. There are so many different ways in which curiosity can come into your sex life. And related to that is creativity. How creative can you be? Can you figure out what you'd like to do tonight? Can you create a scene? Can you get dressed up? Can you role play? Can you have a sensual dinner? I can go on and on and on. But these 3, communication, curiosity, and creativity, are very, very important for you to be able to know what you want, get what you want, and not get bored in your sex life. And related to this is figuring out what turns you on. We all have something called a core erotic theme. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but it is critical. It tells us what is it that really turns us on. Not just what is the touch that turns us on, but honestly, it's like, what is the emotion that we want to go to for sex? Is it like, for me, that I want to be taken, that I want to be dominated because I'm so in control of everything? When I go to sex, I just want everything to be taken care of. If you can meet that need for me, man, I'm going to be turned on, right? So really understanding what turns us on. Again, another thing that I really focus on in my work with individuals, couples, and in the group coaching program, that's going to really help your desire because you're going to start getting what you want. So I know I ran through a lot of different things here. I talked about 5 factors that impact your desire. If you're interested in finding out more, as I said, I do individual coaching. I work with couples, especially couples who are really struggling in their sex life. I like to say that from sexless to sexy, I really help couples get from a sexless marriage back into a sexy marriage. And I have a beautiful group coaching program for women as well. All of this you can find out on my website, powerofpleasure.com, and you can reach out to me. You can email at Xanet@powerofpleasure.com. I do offer some free consultations, so if that's something that's of interest to you, please reach out to me, because I want all of you to be able to reclaim your desire and have the best, most juicy, and most fiery sex life ever.